So, Daniel, at the end of the last segment, we were talking about the propensity for Democrats in the past to pre-negotiate or theoretically pre-negotiate when it comes to immigration. They would compromise and then give the right no room to go anywhere except for further to the right. We had Barack Obama, who deported a record number of people, but he couldn't quite advertise it because theoretically the Democrats wouldn't appreciate that, and the right didn't care. They wanted more. They wanted no immigration. So what should be the position? And you've written it in the context of Bernie Sanders. But I also think this is a position that, broadly speaking, on the left, people should be taking. What should be the position, both from like sort of a moral and a policy perspective, and from a political perspective, in terms of like entering into, negotiations with a right wing that's not going to go away. They're still going to be out there. So what should be the position?
Well, I think the lesson for the left from the 2 decades of comprehensive immigration reform, establishment, immigration reform debacles has been that if you attempt to give the right what they want as your opening proposal in negotiations, that will only embolden them to both demand increasingly draconian measures, i.e. Trump's wall, that's how we got here, and 2, it'll end up pissing off your own base. The immigrant rights movement radicalized under Obama against Obama's deportation programs and correctly labeled him the deporter in chief. And so at the end of the day, I think it's very clear that the only way to achieve real immigration reform, i.e. the legalization of undocumented immigrants in this country, is not to reach a compromise with Republicans. It's a pragmatic reality, one that's been empirically proven by the past 2 decades experience, that the only way to do it is to defeat the Republicans and pass a good bill. Compromise is not only morally odious with these anti-immigrant forces that have become so powerful in this country, but it doesn't make any pragmatic sense. We have 2 decades of evidence to prove this.
Okay, so that's the political strategy. What is the moral and also the sort of the best, I guess, policy? I mean, that policy may reflect our sense of morality, but it's also in terms of like efficacy, in terms of like what is in the best interest of people, broadly speaking. What is that policy? What does it look like?
Well, I think it's multi-pronged. Again, it involves standalone, no compromise added push for legalizing all undocumented immigrants in this country. Second, it involves no more border security measures. And in fact, significantly dialing back this massive border militarization that we've experienced in recent decades. We went from, very little border fencing to hundreds of miles of border fencing. We went from a few thousand Border Patrol agents in the early 90s to roughly 20,000 today. We have to turn that around, because what was that? That was creating political space to legitimate NAFTA. That is why border militarization took off in the 1990s. And then we have to deal with global warming. And we have to understand that right now, global warming, caused in significant part by emissions of U.S. capitalists, is pushing Central Americans off of their land and to the U.S. border. And so I think that moral case is also a pragmatic case, because what nativism, what anti-immigrant, xenophobic politics do in the U.S. and everywhere is divide the working class. And consistently throughout U.S. history, immigrant workers have been at the forefront of labor struggles in this country. Look at Haymarket in Chicago. Look at the Bread and Roses strike in Lawrence, Massachusetts. Look at the CIO organizing Eastern and Southern European workers alongside Black workers and other people that the AFL didn't want to deal with, into just this incredibly muscular striking union force in this country. Look at the Justice for Janitors strike in 1990 in Los Angeles. Immigrant workers are at the vanguard of the American working class movement that Bernie Sanders is politically leading right now. And so I think he needs to better recognize that and better speak to it and understand that when he gives any credence to right-wing anti-immigrant politics, it's not only bad for immigrants, but it divides the working class that he needs to unite to win.
Well, let me ask you this in terms of one of the things when we talked about that town hall with Fox, one of the things I think he did very effectively when it came to Medicare for All was he didn't try and hide the ball about taxes. Mm-hmm. He was very upfront with what, people perceive as the painful part about it. Taxes go up. But he made an argument that the net costs to individuals and to the country is going to go down. What's the equivalent to that? I mean, aside from what is the policy sales pitch to people who are not concerned about class consciousness, to people who are not concerned about, I don't want labor strife. That's not why I want to let immigrants in this country. What is that pitch?
Well, I think it's a two-pronged pitch. One is the one that we hear from Democrats all the time, which is a sort of basic moral pitch that it's wrong to separate families. It's wrong to put people in cages. And that is a necessary component of any immigrant rights program. And I think could be effective at winning over, perhaps affluent suburban swing voters. But I think you really need to move beyond liberal moralism into a class conscious immigrant rights politics that directly expresses and explains how immigrant rights are critical to advancing workers' rights in this country. I think that's how you don't hide the ball on that, is that you be very clear about the role that immigrants play in American politics, society, and economy, and not do the liberal establishment thing, which I think is very dangerous, of saying the American economy needs immigrants to do labor that American workers don't want to do. I think that really irks a lot of American working people, and understandably, and I think it plays into sort of Bannonite, Herrenvolk, social nationalist, crap that's very dangerous. And I think that has to be not the message.
As you bring these folks in and put them into a system, they are protected, and their wages are protected in the same way that Americans' wages are, and therefore they cannot be exploited. And that exploitation doesn't end with them. It is also a means in which to exploit others, it seems to me, regardless of where they are on that spectrum of what jobs they'll take. But Daniel Denvir, I really appreciate your time today. Interesting stuff. Thanks for your time.